All right, you guys. So tonight, as we mentioned, we are going to close out chapter 2, actually, starting off at verse 13. And we're going to read all the way to verse 18 for this first section. Matthew chapter 2, verses 13 through 18. And it reads, "When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. 'Get up,' he said. 'Take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child and kill him.' So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, 'Out of Egypt I called my son.' When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and refusing to be comforted, because they are no more." Surprise. Okay, the Magi have left to go back to their home in the east, and upon them leaving, an angel of the Lord appears to Joseph in a dream yet again. And the angel tells Joseph to get up, to take Jesus, take Mary, and flee or escape to Egypt, and to stay there until he's told otherwise. And it's in this verse 13 here, that we finally get to see Herod's true intentions, right? The Magi didn't go back to Herod after finding Jesus, but, Herod, as we mentioned, he still knows from those Old Testament prophecies that the Christ is going to be born in Bethlehem. So the angel tells Joseph, listen, y'all got to get up out of here. Like, get up, flee Bethlehem, because Herod is going to send his people to Bethlehem to destroy Jesus. Now, please note that even before Herod even had the opportunity to carry out his true intentions, which obviously, clearly, was not to worship the child, as he said back in verse 8, God again intercepts the plans of men by commanding Joseph to get up and flee to Egypt. Now, if you are wondering why the angel tells Joseph to go to Egypt of all places, well, according to some commentaries that I read, there was a Jewish community in Egypt, but more than that, Egypt was outside of the rule or jurisdiction of Herod. So Jesus would have been safe from him in Egypt. Also, Bethlehem was only about, I think it's like 90 miles or so from the border of Egypt. So it wouldn't have been like a super, super long journey. Relatively short journey, maybe a day's trip, depending upon how fast they're able to walk. But yeah, so that could have been it. But also very shortly, we're going to see some greater significance in this flight to Egypt. Okay, verses 14 through 15 read, "So he got up, he took the child and his mother during the night and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, 'Out of Egypt I called my son.'" So just like he did when he had his first dream, Joseph literally obeys the command. And it seems like almost immediately, right? Like he has the dream. He doesn't wait until daytime. No. He gets up. He takes the child. He takes Mary, and they get out of Dodge in the night. And they stay there in Egypt until Herod dies. Now, Matthew explains that all of this that had taken place was so that what was spoken through the prophet would be fulfilled. And he actually recites an Old Testament passage here that reads, "Out of Egypt I called my son." So this prophecy can be found in Hosea chapter 11, verse 1. And I have it here for you guys. "When Israel was a child, I loved him. Out of Egypt I called my son." A little bit of backstory with this. In the Old Testament, the Israelites, who again later become known as the Jews, they were residents in Egypt. However, after some time, the Egyptians began to enforce some harsh and very, very heavy labor on the Israelites, and the Israelites end up becoming their slaves. But after 400 or like 430 years or so, God sent the Israelites a deliverer named Moses, which you're probably familiar with him. This Moses is the one through whom God had rescued the Israelites from the Egyptian slave masters. And God did all these, wonderful acts, right? This is where we learn about the 10 plagues on the land of Egypt and the parting of the Red Sea. Fast forward to a few hundred years in the future from the Exodus, and we get to see Hosea, right? In chapter 11, verse 1, where God's speaking through Hosea, and he's recounting this time where God had rescued his people, who he metaphorically refers to as his son. Right, he's rescuing his metaphorical son out of Egypt. So in his gospel account, Matthew was rightly identifying that all that had taken place with Jesus and his flight to Egypt is a typological fulfillment of Hosea chapter 11, verse 1. God called Israel, right, his metaphorical son out of Egypt. And yet again, God will call Jesus his true son out of Egypt after the death of Herod. Okay, so we are getting a little bit more context into who this Jesus, who Matthew rightly identifies as the Christ, is, right? He is the Son of God. We should get more on that next week, if I'm not mistaken, in chapter 3. But moving on, these New Testament events, they correspond to or fulfill Old Testament events in a typological fashion, and it was all orchestrated and woven together by God. And it's just beautiful. Verse 16, and it reads, when Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. So, yeah, Herod was ruthless. Here's biblical evidence of the extreme measures that he was willing to take when he felt that his kingship was in jeopardy. So remember how in verse 7, how he asked the Magi around what time the star had appeared so that he would know, around how old this newborn king of the Jews was. Well, based upon their answer that the Magi give to Herod, Herod's going to know that whoever this child is, he's at most 2 years old at this point, right? So knowing that the wise men or the Magi, that they had pulled a doozy on him, he goes into this furious rage, and he slaughters, murders, kills all of the little boys who were 2 years old and under within the region of Bethlehem and the surrounding areas. So scholars estimate that at this time, there could have been between 10 to 30 young boys at that age in Bethlehem. But truly, if it was just one, right, that would have been one too many. Like, this is crazy. This is awful. This is devastating. Verse 17 and 18, I think is where we are. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. So here's another example of typology, you guys, how an Old Testament event sort of foreshadows or points to a future event. When that typically happens, it's typically an event on a broader spectrum. That future event is like a more significant event. So the Old Testament in this particular example is a reference to the prophecies of Jeremiah, which I have here, where Jeremiah in chapter 31, verse 15 says, "This is what the Lord says. A voice is heard in Ramah, mourning and great weeping, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more." So again, that's just what Matthew had written here in this passage. When we look at Jeremiah chapter 31, God is speaking through him concerning the coming deportation, that exile of the Israelites. So Ramah was 5 miles to the north of Jerusalem, and it was actually on the route to Babylon where the Israelites were exiled to. So a voice is heard in Ramah, right? And this voice is the bitter weeping of Rachel. Okay, well, who is Rachel? Rachel was one of Jacob's wives. So remember Jacob from the genealogy from chapter 1. Abraham fathered Isaac. Isaac fathered Jacob, and then Jacob fathered all the 12 tribes, so to speak. Well, Jacob, or Rachel, was one of Jacob's wives. So what Jeremiah is doing here in this passage in chapter 31 is likening Rachel to the mothers of the children of Israel who were going to be carried off into exile, right? Therefore, leaving the land of Israel desolate. and without her children, so to speak. So this worst, like this was an absolutely devastating event for the nation of Israel. Honestly, like what nation? Like y'all ain't got no nation at this point, right? So this past event of Rachel, or the mothers of the children of Israel weeping for her children because they are no more, was a foreshadow of the slaughter of these innocent baby boys in Matthew's gospel account, where the mothers of the children of Israel stand as a type or a symbol of the mothers of the children of that Herod had just murdered, right? They're weeping and they're lamenting their children because they're no more. They're gone because of the wickedness of Herod. It's just awful. Okay. Moving on, verses 19 through 21. After Herod died, the angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and says, "Get up, take the child, take his mother, and go back to Israel, because those who were trying to take the child's life, they're dead." So Joseph gets up, he takes the child and his mother, and they go back to the land of Israel. So again, we're just seeing this continual care, sovereign care that God has in protection of Jesus. And I love that he's doing it through Joseph, you guys. So I feel like we hear about Mary a lot, and as we should, right? Awesome woman, she believed what was spoken to her through the angel of the Lord, that she would bear a child, that being Jesus, while being a virgin. Like, that's awesome. But I feel like we don't talk about how the tremendous way in which God used Joseph as well. So yeah, this is just awesome to me. So in verse 13, the angel of the Lord told Joseph to leave Bethlehem, right? To flee to Egypt, and then to stay there until the angel tells him to. Well, here is the angel of the Lord in verse 20 for the third time, appearing to Joseph in another dream and commanding him to take his family and return back to Israel, because they're in the clear, because at that point in time, Herod had died. Now, I'm not I don't know how long that they were in Egypt for, quite frankly, but we do know that Herod died in around 4 BC. Okay, so Joseph takes Jesus, he takes Mary, they head on back to Israel. And again, here's this fulfillment of the prophecy from the prophet Hosea, chapter 11, verse 1, "Out of Egypt I called my son." Verse 22, "But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee." So Herod has died, but that did not stop this Herodian dynasty from continuing on. So a guy named Archelaus is reigning in Judea in place of Herod. Joseph hears about this and he's terrified, like he's shook, like he does not want to go back to Judea, which is in that region that Bethlehem was in. Okay, now the reason why Joseph was terrified was because Archelaus was just as crazy as Herod the Great. In fact, as Matthew writes, Archelaus is one of Herod's sons. So just a little bit of back history on Herod. So after his death, his kingdom was divided between 3 of his sons. That's Herod Philip, Herod Antipas, which we'll learn about in chapter 14, I think, and then Herod Archelaus. Okay, so the Jews were not, they did not like Archelaus because of his harsh rule and his harsh leadership. Like he was awful. And because of this, Caesar, the Roman emperor, remember that Israel at this point in time, they're under the oppression and the power and the control of the Roman Empire. Well, Caesar, the Roman emperor, was afraid of a revolt taking place from the Jews. So he actually banished Archelaus to a place called Gaul, which is modern day France. So his reign it was a couple years. It was not long whatsoever. But yeah, he got out of here. Nevertheless, at this point in time in Matthew's gospel account and in the life of Jesus, Herod's dead and his son Archelaus is reigning in southern Israel. So Joseph is not trying to go back to Judea where he's reigning. He's like, no, I'm not with it. That cannot happen. So he's warned in a dream again. But this time, Joseph is told to go to the district of Galilee, which is in northern Israel, which at this point in time was ruled by Herod Antipas. Okay, this is Herod's Herod Archelaus' half brother. Okay, sorry, I get confused All the Herods. God help me. Okay. Verse 23. And he went and lived in a town called Nazareth. So was fulfilled what was said through the prophets that he would be called a Nazarene. Okay. So Joseph is told that, go back to Israel. But as opposed to going back to Bethlehem where Herod Archelaus was reigning, he's warned another dream to head to northern Israel, in that region of Galilee. And within that region, he settles in the town of Nazareth. And again, we're seeing another prophecy being fulfilled in this relocation to this town where Jesus would end up being raised. Now, notice that Matthew doesn't quote a specific Old Testament prophet here, right? But he writes that their settlement, their relocation in Nazareth is the fulfillment of what was written by the prophets, plural. Okay? Now, here's the thing. We're not going to find any word for word prophecy, Old Testament prophecy, that states that Messiah will be from Nazareth and therefore called a Nazarene. We're not going to find that. What we do have, however, is this consistent theme in the Old Testament that Messiah will be despised by his people. Well, even so, how does this connect to the town of Nazareth? So I have some passages here. Let me pull them up. Okay, now this is concerning Nazareth. So this is the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verses 43 through 46. I'm not going to read it, but this is another gospel writer. His name is John, who, like Matthew, ends up becoming a disciple or a student of Jesus. Now, by this time in John's gospel account, the events that we've just gone over in Matthew chapter 2 are actually far in the past. So Jesus, at this point in time, he's around 30 years old, and he's called a man named Philip to become one of his disciples. So Philip goes off and finds his friend named Nathaniel, and Philip is like, bro, like, we found he who was called him. Okay, like we have found the Messiah. We found the one who Moses and all the prophets prophesied about, this Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. And Nathaniel's response is, okay, can anything good come out of Nazareth? Now, why would he say that? Well, Nazareth was a very, very small town, and it was a town that the Jews had little respect for. The people of Nazareth were looked down upon. So in the mind of Nathaniel, there's this inconsistency with what Philip has just told him about the Messiah. How can the one that we've been waiting for, how can the promised one who is coming to liberate us and free us, and he's going to rule and be king, how can the one who the prophets wrote about, our Messiah, how can someone as good as him come from a place as bad as that? Like, what do you mean? Now, concerning the coming Messiah, stick with me, we have Psalm chapter 22, verse 6, where David writes, "But I'm a worm and not a man, scorned by mankind and despised by the people." So this is a psalm that was actually written, as we mentioned, by King David, who was, he was going through it at this time when he wrote this, but David, through the Holy Spirit, is foretelling of the sufferings of Christ. So remember, David, who was a type of Christ, is speaking of how he himself was despised by his people. But in this, he's foretelling of how the true Messiah, this Jesus of Nazareth, is going to be despised by his people as well. Okay, I have another one. This is Isaiah chapter 49, verse 7. "This is what the Lord says, the Redeemer and Holy One of Israel, to him who was despised and abhorred by the nation, to the servant of rulers. Kings will see you and stand up. Princes will see and bow down because of the Lord who is faithful, the Holy One of Israel who has chosen you." Now, this is God speaking to the one whom he has chosen, his servant, his Holy One, who is the Messiah, who kings and rulers will come and bow down to, but also the one who will be despised and abhorred by the nations. What? Okay, another slide. Isaiah 53, verse 3. "He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem." So this is another messianic prophecy about the suffering servant of the Lord. That is the Messiah, who will be despised and rejected by his people. Okay, so just as Matthew states the prophets prophesied about the coming Messiah who would be despised and hated by his people, just as this tiny overlooked town of Nazareth was despised by people as well. And thus, what was written by the prophets was fulfilled, that Messiah would be called a Nazarene. Check one, peace check. I'm at peace, check one, check one. I'm at peace, check two, check one, two, peace check.